Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're doing a Goblin Mystic Mine deck profile. So this is a really interesting deck that's actually a Patreon request deck profile for Izzy. So Izzy asked me to make a deck that could actually utilize summoning goblins and using Mystic Mine in the same deck. And it's a really awesome thing when you get to make a deck based on an old school card like Goblin Attack Force that was used all the way back in Duel Monsters, the original series of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it was one of my first cards I actually owned when I was younger, and it's a awesome card still to this day. I really like the concept of the way this deck actually works because it basically summons out the goblins to your side of the field and then lets the goblins run back into the Mystic Mine to then wait out a turn to be able to attack again, which is a very interesting concept. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can come part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below just like Izzy did for all those awesome rewards like getting your name straight every single video, getting a signed cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month you're a patron along with test hands. And definitely give Izzy some love down in the comments down below. So we're gonna get straight on into this guy. So first off, we're gonna be playing 3 copies of Goblin Attack Force, which is still hands down the best of the Goblin cards in the entire archetype. Then when this card attacks, it's changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase, and this position cannot be changed during your next turn. So it has to wait an entire turn to be able to switch back to attack position, which is fine in a deck like this because there's cards that just bypass that total effect, where this card pretty much turns into a 2300 normal summon, which is pretty good. We then play 3 copies of Goblin Elite Attack Force, which basically does the exact same thing as Goblin Attack Force, except it has 100 less attack and 1500 more defense. It has the ability to, if this card attacks, it is changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase, and this card's battle position cannot be changed until the end of your next turn, except with a card effect, which is pretty good for being able to have a 2200 normal summon. We then play 3 copies of Goblin Marauding Squad, which is the next one that has the next weakest attack points. This card is a really funny card because it's actually based on Marauding Captain, which is hilarious to me. And when this card declares an attack, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects when this card attacks, which is a very neat effect. And at the end of the battle phase, it's switched to defense position, and the battle phase position of this card cannot be changed until the end of your next turn, which is kind of neat. And it's a really cool card because all your goblins in this particular deck share that particular effect. We then play 3 copies of Goblinberg. Goblinberg is another goblin card that you actually can play in this deck. When it's normal summoned, you can special summon a level 4 or lower monster from your hand, then change this card to defense position, which is pretty good just to be able to throw it in defense position and special summon out another copy of a monster from your hand to make a rank 4 play. This card is very, very important to the strategy. We then play 2 copies of Masked Chameleon to round out the monsters. This card is very unique in this deck because it cannot be normal summoned, or if you control a level 5 or higher monster on your field, but that's not a big deal because all the monsters we play in this deck are level 4, and nothing in the extra deck is actually a synchro because this card is basically just here to make rank 4 plays. It has the ability also that when this card is normal summoned, you can target 1 monster with 0 attack in your graveyard and special summon it back, which is the copies of the Goblin Marauding Squad, the Goblinberg, and the Goblin Attack Force. The Elite Attack Force has, with that armor on them, they have 1500 defense. But what this card also does is once you put that monster in defense position, its effects are negated, and you cannot special summon any other monsters except with from the extra deck during the turn you activate this effect. Not a big deal for this card because basically you're just going to make this card normal summon it and then summon out a copy of the Goblin Marauding Squad, Goblinberg, or Goblin Attack Force back to your side of the field to make a rank 4 play. Now a card I will mention you guys that I thought about playing is a card called Scrounging Goblin. Scrounging Goblin is a very neat card in this deck. I didn't end up playing it because I wanted to play a little bit more control variant of this deck where you're making rank 4s and swinging at your opponent. It's a very unique card that basically when it attacks and inflicts damage to your opponent can either give you a card from their hand to negate the effect, or you get to add a goblin monster from your deck to your hand. The reason I didn't play it was because it didn't seem to work very well when playtesting, but it is a card that I did consider putting in here, and you can over Upstart Goblin and another spell card or trap card that we will get into in a minute. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. You can't even drop a Masked Chameleon if you want to play Scrounging Goblin. I will mention that too. So For the rest of the deck, guys, we're going to be playing a single copy of Terraforming because you're trying to get to Mystic Mine as quickly as possible because it's a very important card for this deck. One copy of Monster Reborn. Monster Reborn is very helpful in this deck, especially if your opponent sends a monster to graveyard. You can bring it back to your side of the field and use it for a rank 4 play. One copy of Reinforcements of the Army because it will add your copies of your Goblin attack force from your deck to your hand and your Goblin Berg from your deck to your hand. But it can't search your copy of your Masked Chameleon, and it cannot search your copy of your Goblin Elite attack force because Masked Chameleon is obviously a reptile. Your Goblin Marauding Squad is a Beast Warrior, and your copies of your Elite attack force are Fiend monsters. So this card can only search Elite attack or a regular attack force or your copies of your Goblin Bergs. We then play a single copy of Upstart Goblin. Upstart Goblin is very good in this deck because it's kind of a part of the archetype because it's goblins, but you can drop it, like I said earlier, if you want to. Because this deck does play Pot of Extravagance, you can drop this card out of the deck for a copy of Scrounging Goblin, which is an option for you guys, but I wanted to make the deck really fast to be more of a control-based deck. So this card does come in handy if you want to dig deeper in the deck to try and get to your particular combo pieces. We then play 2 copies of Double or Nothing. Double or Nothing is so important in this deck because you're trying to make it a rank 4 build to be able to go into Utopia Double to swing at your opponent while you have Mystic Mine on your field, which is very, very important. But this card is very, very good in this deck. We then play 3 copies of Mystic Mine as well. Mystic Mine this is actually the first time on the entire channel that I've actually used Mystic Mine in a deck profile. But this card is actually kind of neat in this particular deck. I like what it does. It even kind of makes me think that this is one of the goblins in the archetype, that if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, your opponent cannot activate monster effects or declare attacks. And if you control more monsters than your opponent does, you can't activate monster effects or declare attacks. And then once per turn, during the end phase, if both players control the same number of monsters, destroy this card. This card is basically here to buy you a turn because usually you want to go first in this deck because you'll activate this card right off the bat, normal summon a monster, and then pass. It can be that simple with this deck. You just normal summon a monster to your field, because if you just activate Mystic Mine and pass, it will automatically destroy itself because both players will control 0 monsters on the field and it will instantly destroy itself. But this card is very good to help you buy a turn. We then play 3 copies of Moon Mirror Shield. Moon Mirror Shield is a very unique card in this deck and helps out the deck a lot for what it does. It makes it so the battling monster always has 100 attack higher than the opponent's monster, but you have to keep in mind about this card is that if you activate this card on a monster that has, say, like a Goblin attack force, and you attack into a monster that has 0 attack, it will drop the Goblin attack force to have 100 attack because it always is 100 points higher than the monster it's battling. So that is very important to keep in mind as you play this card. We then play 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance just to help you dig into the deck to get the exact cards that you need out of the deck, like Mystic Mine, copies of your monsters like Goblinberg, and copies of, say, your copies of the trap cards that we're playing, because trap cards in this deck are very important. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're playing a single copy of Skill Drain, which is one of the cards I actually dropped for the Scrounging Goblin. So if you want to play Scrounging Goblin, you can drop this card and you can drop the Upstart Goblin, but I really wouldn't recommend it. But it's a card that I thought about playing in this deck. This card basically negates the effects of all effect monsters on the field, so all of your goblins do not have to switch to defense position, which is really helpful. Comes in handy as well if you use your copy of Pot of Extravagance and you hit all 3 copies of your Utopia or Utopia Double. This card is really, really good for this deck. 1 copy of Metaverse. Metaverse is ridiculously good in this deck because Metaverse lets you activate Mystic Mine directly from the deck. And the next card you guys are going to probably be surprised about, but it's actually 3 copies of Ojama Trio. So Ojama Trio, you might be wondering, hey, how does that work in here? Well, the really neat thing about this card is that going first, if you open up this plus Final Attack Order, you pretty much win the game, because what this card does is it gives your opponent 3 tokens. When it gives them the 3 tokens, all 3 of those monsters have 0 attack. Guess what? When you activate Final Attack Order, they all go to attack position. You make a Utopia Double, you swing through the token, they take 10,000 damage. You instantly win. Pretty cool, huh? Plus, if you activate the copy of Ojama Trio while your opponent has, say, 1 monster on the field and you have 1 monster on the field, it can save your Mystic Mine as well, which is kind of neat as well. So if you open up your copies of your Mystic Mine plus an Ojama Trio, Final Attack Order, and 2 monsters that you can normal summon, you've won. Because unless they can out your back row and out your Mystic Mine, you're going to win because you're going to be able to throw these on your opponent's side of the field, activate the Final Attack Order, switch them to attack position, and then swing through your opponent for game, which is really awesome. The final attack orders basically are like skill drain in this deck because they make it so your monsters can't switch to defense position. Neither player can change the battle position of monsters, and they have to be in attack position. This card is extremely important to draw into. We then play 3 copies of Judgment. Judgment is here to protect Mystic Mine and protect some of your monsters to make sure your plays go off in this deck. So this card is very helpful to basically say, nope, you're not going to activate that Mystical Space Typhoon. Nope, you're not going to activate that Twin Twisters. This card just helps out a lot when going first if you do draw on this card. And it does stop a lot of cards in this deck, especially if you're trying to search in the deck and your opponent activates something. You basically can just stop them from doing stuff. The only thing that negates, though, is if a monster will be summoned or a spell or trap is activated, you can pay the half your life to be able to negate it. So keep that in mind as you're playing this deck. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Utopia Double. Utopia Double is very helpful in this deck, and it's pretty much the boss monster outside of Goblin Attack Force. And what this card does is basically you detach a material from this card, add a double or nothing from deck to hand. You then put a Utopia Double on top of it, or Utopia on top of it. The Utopia comes out at 5,000, and you get to add double or nothing from deck to hand. You then put the Utopia on top of it. The Utopia comes out at 5,000. You swing at your opponent, and then after you swing at your opponent, you will do a grand total of 10,000 because you'll negate the effect. Drop double or nothing, and then attack again for 10,000. If that's into an Ojama token that's in attack position, you win instantly, which is really cool. We then played 2 copies of number 60. I have debated about dropping either the number 60s or the Baguskas for Utopia the Lightnings, which is an option for you guys, but I feel like the deck is working just fine how it is. So that's why I actually left these where they are. But what this card does is you detach 2 materials, you either draw 2 or discard 1, you special summon a monster from the grave in defense, or you skip your next battle phase and you double the attack of a monster. This card's really funny to double the attack of a Goblin Attack Force to 46 to get over something. It's really funny to double a Utopia Double, or double a Utopia that already has 5,000 because it will let you deal 20,000 damage to your opponent in a swing, which is awesome. And it just is a really helpful card. We then play 2 copies of Baguska. Baguska is really helpful because basically it stops your opponent. It's like a walking Mystic Mime. You put it in defense and it will stop your opponent from all sorts of monster effects, which is kind of neat. We play 2 copies of Exciton Knight just to blow board, just in case you need to. 2 copies of Tornado Dragon. The Tornado Dragons are basically here because you want to pop back row, which is really helpful. And a single copy of AA Zeus, because it is a rank 4 build, and so you can make Zeus really easily by just putting it on top of a monster. I will mention you guys as well, if you don't want to play Zeus and you're looking for a budget deck, this deck is actually very budget. So you can actually drop the Zeus if you want to for Utopia the Lightning, and it still works, which is fine. If you don't want to play Extravagance, you can drop the Extravagance out of the deck for Desires, and the deck still works as well. So the deck actually can pull off some really interesting combos, especially with playing multiple copies of Double or Nothing. You're probably not going to banish both copies, so you can play Desires over the copy of your Pot of Extravagance in this build. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really awesome deck. I really hope I did this deck justice for you, Izzy. It's hilarious to be able to just activate a copy of Ojama Trio, throw it against your opponent, and then immediately just attack them with a 10,000 monster, and using the goblins as your monsters to go into. You can even make an entire like swarm of goblins against your opponent and then get the Mystic Mine off the field by matching the same number of monsters that your opponent has, and then just go after them with the goblins, which is awesome, especially with Moon Mirror Shield in this deck. So it's a really fun deck. So definitely give Izzy some love down in the comments down below, guys, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can come part notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below, just like Izzy did. And we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.